Welcome to the Palace Theater's Broadway Buzz, presented by Webster Bank. My name is Stuart Brown, founder of the 24/7 online Broadway radio station, soundsofbroadway.com. If you are looking for non-stop Broadway music, tune into soundsofbroadway.com, playing the best from off-Broadway, Broadway, and the London stage. I'll be your host for this podcast series. For this edition of the Broadway Buzz, I'll be talking about Fiddler on the Roof, which will be playing at the Palace Theater on Saturday, April 15th at 2 and 8 p.m. and Sunday, April 16th at 1 p.m. For ticket information, go to the Palace website, that is palacetheaterct.org. The original production of Fiddler on the Roof opened on September 22, 1964, and ran for 3,242 performances, making it the longest-running show in Broadway history at the time. The record has been greatly surpassed. Phantom of the Opera has run for over 14,000 performances. However, Fiddler was the first musical to pass 3,000 performances. It stayed number one until 1980, when Grease became the new champ. Fiddler, after all these years, is still one of the longest-running shows in Broadway history. It is the 17th longest-running musical. The show has music by Jerry Bach, lyrics by Sheldon Harnick, and book by Joseph Stein. The score by Bach and Harnick is their best-known musical. They also composed the score for She Loves Me, The Rothschilds, and the Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning musical, Fiorello. So here's a quick trivia quiz for you. Fiorello tied for Best Tony Award for Best Musical with what other musical? I'll get to the answer in just a second. This was the first show from the two that was conceived by them, by Sheldon Harnick and Jerry Bach. Until Fiddler, they had always written scores on commission or on assignment from producers. So do you know the answer to the trivia quiz? The Sound of Music, and Fiorello tied for Best Musical in 1960. As I said, the book of the show was by Joseph Stein. He also wrote the libretto for the Sammy Davis Jr. musical Mr. Wonderful, Take Me Along, and that starred Jackie Gleason and Walter Pidgeon, and also the Stephen Schwartz musical The Baker's Wife that starred Patti LuPone. Fiddler was directed and choreographed by Jerome Robbins, and that was his last original Broadway staging. It starred Zero Mostel as Tevye. The set, designed in the style of Marc Chagall's paintings, was by Boris Aronson. Chagall reportedly did not like the show. Fiddler won 9 1965 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, Best Book, Direction, Score, and Best Actor for Zero Mostel. So how did Fiddler come about? In 1960, a friend of Sheldon Harnick suggested he look into the book Wandering Star, and that was a novel by Sholem Aleichem, and turning it into a musical. It concerned a Yiddish theatrical troupe touring Russia, and Stein, Bach, and Harnick loved it, but felt the story was too big and sprawling for the musical stage. At this point, they began looking for other material by the author. That's when they gravitated to the stories about Tevye and his 7 daughters. Now, if you know Fiddler, in the show, Fiddler, or Tevye, has 5 daughters, so they cut out 2 daughters for the musical, and they set out to adapt 3 stories from Sholem Aleichem's Tevye's Daughters into the show. According to the author David Ewan, Joseph Stein, who wrote the book, said, "The structure of the play required the creation of new scenes and new dialogue. Practically none of the dialogue from the original stories was usable, since the original material was not written for the stage, and the dialogue within it had a very special appeal." In the original stories, Tevye was a simple, passive man, but Stein felt it was necessary to give the role sufficient strength to make him the moving force while still keeping character shadings of the original. The show has enjoyed 5 Broadway revivals. The original London production opened on February 16, 1967, and ran for over 2,000 performances. It starred the Israeli actor Topol as Tevye, and he also starred in the very successful 1971 film, which was the top-grossing movie of that year. As most of you know, Topol passed away last week at the age of 87. In 2008, he stated he estimated he had played the role of Tevye over 3,500 times. Zero Mostel was Hal Prince, the producer's choice for Tevye. Jerome Robbins wanted Tom Bosley, who won a Tony Award for the musical Fiorello, and would go on to TV fame in the show Happy Days. Among others discussed were Danny Kaye, Alan King, Howard Da Silva, Danny Thomas, and Julius DeRosa. Prince wanted a strong presence and eventually signed Mostel, even though he signed only a 9-month contract. Prince actually liked the short contract, as Mistel was known to cut up as soon as he got bored in a part. And if you know anything about his previous role, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, later in the run, that was one of the big complaints by the author, Zero Mostel, sort of cutting up because he was kind of getting bored with the part. In addition, according to Prince, if an actor is signed to a long-term contract in a starring role and then becomes identified with the show, it's very possible and even likely he will be encouraged to make greater and greater demands on the management because he feels he is indispensable. Hal Prince in his later years was a renowned director, but he was also a shrewd producer. During the original run of Fiddler, many actors stepped into the role of Tevye. You had Luther Adler, Herschel Bernardi, Harry Goss, and Paul Lipson, who was Mistel's understudy in the original production, and he went to clock over 2,000 performances in the role of Tevye, both on the Broadway stage and in the regional theater. The first Broadway revival opened on December 18, 1976, only ran for 176 performances. It did star Zero Mostel as Tevye, and Jerome Robbins again directed and choreographed. The second one opened in July of 1981, a limited run at Lincoln Center. Herschel Bernardi starred as Tevye. The third Broadway revival opened in November of 1960, ran for 241 performances. This one starred Topol as Tevye. The fourth revival opened in February of 2004, ran for 781 performances. You had Alfred Molina and then Harvey Fierstein star as Tevye. Rosie O'Donnell came in as the role for Goldie. The last revival opened in December of 2015, starred Danny Burstein, and ran for 463 performances. There has also been one other New York production, an all-Yiddish production, and that opened in the summer of 2018 for a limited run at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, for a highly successful run. Its run was extended, and it eventually opened off-Broadway, closed, and then came back to off-Broadway, closing this past fall. That show was directed by Joel Grey. This concludes this episode of the Broadway Buzz. For ticket information, go to the Palace website, palacetheaterct.org. You've been listening to the Palace Theater's Broadway Buzz, presented by Webster Bank. My name is Stuart Brown, founder of the 24/7 online Broadway radio station, soundsofbroadway.com. If you are looking for non-stop Broadway music, tune into soundsofbroadway.com, playing the best from off-Broadway, Broadway, and the London stage. Thank you for listening. I hope you will join me on our next podcast episode. Until then, stay safe, be well, and be informed with the Broadway Buzz.